Have you ever wondered how people flexed their wealth back in the 1960s? I mean, sure. Today it's all about flashy cars, designer clothes, and extravagant vacations plastered all over social media. But what did being rich look like in a time when the only status update you had was the kind of car parked in your driveway? Let's take a trip down memory lane and talk about the subtle and not so subtle ways people showed they had money in the swinging 60s. Spoiler alert, color TVs were the TikTok followers of their day. First up, let's talk television. Owning a color TV in the 1960s was the equivalent of owning the latest iPhone before anyone else. Back then, black and white TVs were still the norm. But if you had a color TV, oh, you weren't just watching the Ed Sullivan Show, you were living it in full Technicolor glory. Neighborhood kids would crowd around your living room window just to catch a glimpse of those vibrant hues. And let's not forget, there were only a handful of shows even broadcast in color. But hey, what's the point of being rich if not to stay ahead of the trend? Now, moving on to cars. Back in the 60s, having one car was respectable. But having two? That's when people started whispering about you at the PTA meetings. And if one of those cars was a Cadillac, forget it. You might as well have had a neon sign that read, "We're doing very well, thank you." A Cadillac was the gold standard of success, luxurious, stylish, and big enough to fit an entire little league team in the back seat. Bonus points if it had tail fins, because nothing says I've made it like a car that looks like it could double as a spaceship. Speaking of over-the-top displays of wealth, let's talk swimming pools. An in-ground swimming pool in your backyard was the pinnacle of suburban extravagance. Not only did it scream, "We have disposable income," but it also came with the unspoken promise of summer pool parties that would make the neighbors green with envy. Of course, owning a pool also meant paying for the upkeep, which was the true test of financial stability. Rich people didn't just own pools. They could afford to keep them sparkling clean. And then there were appliances. Ever heard of a dishwasher? No, not the human kind, but the actual machine. In the 60s, dishwashers were practically a luxury item. If you had one, it meant you had better things to do with your time than hand-wash dishes, like playing bridge or hosting one of those fabulous cocktail parties. Bonus points if your kitchen also had a matching avocado green or harvest gold refrigerator, because nothing said high class like trendy kitchen decor. Let's not forget the wardrobe. Owning designer clothes or custom-made suits back then was a big deal. If your clothes came from Paris or Italy, you weren't just fashionable. You were wealthy. Women who wore mink stoles and men with tailored suits were walking advertisements for success. And yes, real fur was in, and nobody batted an eye, well, except maybe the minks. Then, there were the little things that people don't often think about. Owning a personal telephone line, for instance. Back then, it was common for families to share one phone number, and you had to deal with the occasional nosy sibling or parent listening in on your calls. But if you had a private line, that was next-level wealth. Oh, and let's not forget air conditioning. In the 60s, central air was a rare luxury. If you could keep your house cool in the middle of summer, you weren't just rich. You were living in the future. Of course, it wasn't all about material things. Being rich in the 60s also meant access to exclusive clubs and country clubs where the real networking happened. Membership wasn't just about playing golf or tennis, it was about status. And let's not forget travel. If you were taking vacations abroad or even flying on a plane instead of enduring endless road trips, you were living the dream. Air travel was still a glamorous affair back then, complete with fine dining and plenty of legroom, basically the opposite of what we have today. And now the piece de resistance for any fancy home in the 1960s, a home bar. If your living room or basement had a fully stocked bar, complete with swivel stools, a mirrored backsplash, and perhaps even a neon sign, you weren't just rich. You were the life of the party. People with home bars didn't just drink cocktails. They served them with flair, shaking martinis like they were auditioning for Mad Men. Bonus points if your bar had one of those vintage globe liquor cabinets. It was both classy and the ultimate conversation starter. Now let's talk about home intercom systems. These were a big deal in the 1960s. Imagine not having to yell upstairs to get your kids to come down for dinner. Instead, you pressed a button and your voice magically appeared in every room. People thought it was straight out of the Jetsons. Did you need it? Probably not. Did it make your home feel futuristic and fancy? Absolutely. Next on the list, country estate homes. If you had a house on a big plot of land, maybe with a long driveway or even a gate, you weren't just rich, you were elite. The bigger the yard, the more luxurious the life. And if your home had extras like a sunken living room, a finished basement, or even a game room, you were officially living the suburban dream. Bonus points if you had a den, a space that served no real purpose except to prove that you had rooms to spare. Of course, the ultimate sign of wealth in the 1960s was having live-in help. A housekeeper or nanny who actually lived with you was a sure sign you had money to burn. After all, it's one thing to hire someone to help with chores, but it's a whole other level to give them a room in your house. Plus, it meant you didn't have to lift a finger for things like cleaning or cooking. Not only were you rich, you were effortlessly rich. But let's not kid ourselves. Whether it was a Cadillac, a swimming pool, or a home intercom system, wealth in the 1960s wasn't just about what you owned. It was about how you made others feel when they saw it. Envy, admiration, a little bit of awe. That was the goal. And honestly, some things haven't changed all that much, have they? So, what do you think? Were the status symbols of the 1960s simpler? Or do you think we've just gotten more complicated with our flexes today? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching. See you on the next one.